You want to know how a girl who was invisible to her own family ended up standing in uniform while 12 soldiers saluted her in the middle of a church that tried to keep her out? You want to know how nearly $500,000 disappeared while I was out risking my life in places most people can't even pronounce? Or how I found out the only person who ever truly saw me had left me everything, just not in the way anyone expected? This isn't a story about war. It's about betrayal, silence, dignity, and what happens when the quiet one finally speaks. If that sounds like something you need to hear, then stay with me. And while you're here, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. I promise, you'll want to talk about this. My name is Caitlin West, but most people just call me Kate. I'm 29 years old, born and raised in Flagstaff, Arizona, a town where the mountains always seem just out of reach, and the silence in your home can speak louder than words. I've worn a uniform most of my adult life. Not the kind you pick for fashion, but the kind that comes with steel boots, a nameplate, and a duty to protect people who may never even know your name. But before that, before the desert deployments, the medals, the commands, I was a girl in a quiet house, learning early how to disappear. I grew up in a family that smiled at Christmas photos but never really looked at me. You wouldn't have known anything was wrong if you'd come over for dinner. No yelling, no slammed doors, just this strange weight in the air, like the whole house had agreed that I simply wasn't necessary. My younger sister Ashley was the golden child, honey blonde curls, perfect smile, the kind of girl who got trophies just for showing up. Mom would tape her artwork on the fridge even if it was just stick figures. Dad once clapped when she sang a Taylor Swift song off-key in the living room. But when I brought home straight A's, they barely looked up from the TV. If I mentioned wanting to join the military, they said I was being dramatic. If I asked for advice, they told me to ask Ashley. She's more realistic. At school, I was quiet but not weak. I joined the track team, volunteered at the library, applied for colleges I knew we couldn't afford. Not that anyone noticed. At home, I was the ghost who washed dishes before anyone asked and disappeared into her room after. There's a specific kind of ache when you grow up knowing that your presence changes nothing. By the time I turned 18, I didn't throw a fit. I didn't yell or cry or beg them to see me. I just packed my duffel, left a note on the kitchen counter, and took a bus out of town while the sun was still asleep. That note said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of myself. You never had to." No one came after me. I didn't expect them to. Boot camp was the first time someone yelled at me and actually wanted me to succeed. Strange how that kind of rage can feel like love after years of polite rejection. The drill sergeant screamed my name, not Ashley's. For the first time, my name had weight. But that's not what this story is really about. It's not about how I learned to break down an M4 rifle blindfolded or lead a convoy through hostile territory. It's about what was waiting back home, about a family that didn't clap when I came back in uniform, about the lies they told, the money that vanished, and how even betrayal couldn't stop me from becoming more than they ever imagined. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back then, I still thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud someday. It's funny. You can survive ambushes, heat stroke, even mortar fire, but it's the silence in your childhood bedroom that kills you slowest. They say the military breaks you down to build you back up. What they don't tell you is how good that breaking can feel when you've spent your life pretending you didn't exist. In the army, nothing was quiet. Not the clanging of gear at dawn, not the barked commands, not the adrenaline-slick drills that pushed you to the edge of collapse. I felt more seen in those grueling early weeks than I ever had in my own living room. When they screamed my name across the gravel field, I ran harder. Not because I was stronger, but because someone finally saw me. I made it through basic with cracked knuckles and new scars on my palms. And pride. Quiet, burning pride. I didn't call home. They didn't call me either. Instead, I sent money. Not much, just portions of my pay. Automatic transfers to my parents' account every month. I didn't think much of it. I figured it helped. They never said thank you. But again, wasn't used to that. I told myself it didn't matter, that maybe this was how families worked. Or didn't. Deployment came fast. The first time I stepped off a C-130 into a sandstorm, the air stung like needles and smelled of diesel and gun oil. We were in an unnamed location, hot, unstable, full of risk and rumor. I kept my head down. I learned the terrain. I watched people bleed and scream and lose more in seconds than I had in my entire life. But I held. Not just because I trained for it, but because breaking had never really been an option for me. Not since Flagstaff. My team started trusting me. I wasn't the loudest, not the fastest, but I listened. I remembered everything. The quietest soldier in the tent is often the one you turn to when it matters. And when bullets tore into the dirt near our convoy one night, and everyone scrambled for cover, I was the one who dragged Simmons, 22, bleeding, crying for his mom, back behind the Humvee and kept pressure on the wound with my bare hand until medevac arrived. He lived. They gave me a medal for that. I didn't tell anyone back home. But a month later, out of habit, I checked the joint savings account. I didn't need the money. I wasn't spending much. But I wanted to make sure everything was safe. It wasn't. The numbers didn't make sense. The totals were off. Thousands were gone. I blinked. Refreshed the screen. Then again. Maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe it was a glitch. I waited 2 days. Then called the bank from a grainy connection in a tent half a world away. The woman on the other end was polite, professional, until she started listing transactions, flights, a remodel, new appliances, beauty salon packages, thousands withdrawn and redirected, all authorized by my parents. I asked her to repeat that. She did, slowly, kindly. The silence after I hung up was the loudest thing I'd heard in years. I didn't tell anyone in the unit. I went back to drills. I cleaned my weapon. I showed up for every shift early, like nothing was wrong. Because I knew this was bigger than just money. This wasn't just theft. This was confirmation of something I'd always suspected but never dared to say out loud. They never saw what I gave. They just took what they could. I wrote an email. Just one line. I saw the charges. I hope it was worth it. No reply. 3 weeks later, a package arrived for me at base. No note. No return address. Inside was a shoebox with old photos. Me as a kid, covered in dust, half of them bent, all cut from frames. Ashley's face still smiled in most of them. Mine had been cut out. Not torn. Not ripped. Cut. Neatly. With scissors. I stared at the hollow spaces where I used to be, and I understood. This wasn't an accident. It never had been. But I wasn't that girl anymore. The next morning, I requested leave, and I made a call to someone who knew exactly how to find truth in bank records, tax trails, legal gaps no one thinks will ever be discovered. If they wanted to erase me from their story, they were about to learn just how permanent I'd become. The plane landed just after midnight. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. No warm welcome, no waiting arms. I moved through the terminal with the quiet confidence of someone who's had to make space for herself wherever she went. Arizona air hit me like an old memory, dry, familiar, threaded with the scent of creosote and broken promises. The cab driver tried to make conversation, asked if I was visiting family. I said, "Not exactly." We pulled up to the house I used to call home. White siding, a porch swing that never moved, same cracked driveway. It looked smaller now, like something built from a memory that no longer fit. There were lights on inside. Laughter. The faint echo of Ashley's voice. I didn't knock. I didn't want them to see me like this. Dressed in civvies, hair shorter now, carrying the weight of deployments behind tired eyes. Instead, I stood across the street and just watched, like I had as a kid. On birthdays when the cake had Ashley's name on it, even if it wasn't hers. I stayed in a motel that night. Cheap, dusty, but it had a lock. That was enough. The next morning, I met with a lawyer in downtown Phoenix, Sabrina Kim. Sharp eyes, sharper tongue. She'd served 4 years herself, now built a reputation dismantling dirty books and exposing financial fraud. I gave her the bank records, the transfers, everything. She didn't flinch. They've been siphoning your money for at least 5 years, she said, tapping her pen against the printed statements. Some of it through a proxy account in your name, one you never opened. My stomach turned. Who authorized that? She met my eyes. Your mother. And your sister. I clenched my fists under the table, not in rage, in clarity. Sabrina leaned forward. There's something else. We ran a background check just in case. Your grandfather, John West? My dad's father. Yeah, he passed a couple months ago. Not according to the legal system, she said. His will was filed 2 weeks ago, very much alive, until recently, and he left everything to you. I froze. What? He filed it with a private attorney, separate from your family's, his home, the land, even a trust fund he built over years, almost 7 figures, all to you, explicitly excluding your parents and sister. It's airtight. I couldn't breathe. My grandfather had been the only one who treated me like I mattered when I was young. He'd taught me to fish, told me stories about the war, showed me how to fix an engine. I still remembered the way he used to say, "You've got more steel in you than they'll ever understand." He had seen me, and in the end, he hadn't forgotten. His funeral is next week, Sabrina added. They've already made arrangements. You're not listed in the notice. Of course not. I left her office with a folder in my hand and a storm in my chest. Grief, rage, and underneath it, something colder. Something surgical. This wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. It was about truth. I drove to my grandfather's house. The key he gave me years ago still worked. Inside, it smelled like cedar and old leather. Everything was exactly how I remembered it. The clock that ticked too loudly, the armchair with the worn cushion, the framed photograph of him in uniform, standing proud beside a flag. But there was something new, too. On the kitchen table sat an envelope with my name on it. Kate, handwritten, steady, deliberate. Inside was a letter. If you're reading this, then they kept the truth from you. I always knew they would. I didn't leave them anything, not out of spite, but because they never earned it. But you always did. You walked your own path, even when it cost you everything. That takes courage. That takes backbone. Don't let them tell you otherwise. And don't let them take one more thing from you. This is yours. All of it. Live like it. Love like it. Stand like it. I'll see you on the high ground. Grandpa. I read it 3 times. Sat in silence. Let the tears fall without shame. He hadn't forgotten me. But my family had. They didn't just steal from me. They tried to erase me. And now, they were about to stand in a church full of strangers and paint themselves as his only legacy. They didn't know I was coming. They didn't know what I had. But they were about to find out. The church was too quiet. Muted light fell through stained glass, casting warm colors on cold pews. Everything smelled of lilies and old wood polish. It was the kind of silence that demanded reverence. But all I felt was fire under my skin. I stood at the edge of the sanctuary in full dress uniform, medals on my chest, boots shined, hair pinned with regulation precision. It wasn't for them, it was for him. And still, they noticed me like I was the wrong note in a perfect hymn. Ashley turned first. She was in a pearl dress, soft makeup, perfect as always. Her mouth parted slightly when she saw me, as if she'd seen a ghost. Then came the whispering. My parents, her husband, a few distant cousins. All eyes on me, none of them kind. My mother stepped forward like she was about to correct a child. "You shouldn't be here, Caitlin," she said, her voice sharp but hushed. "This is a private service." I looked at her like I was reading her for the first time. "And I'm his granddaughter." She glanced at my uniform. "You could have worn something appropriate." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That's when the church doors opened again. 12 soldiers stepped inside, dressed in perfect formation, all in ceremonial army blues. Their movements were quiet but commanding, like thunder wrapped in silk. One by one, they approached the casket and stood at attention, surrounding it like an honor guard. Then, the man at the front stepped forward, a brigadier general. He looked right at me. "Lieutenant Caitlin West," he said, voice deep, clear, echoing through the vaulted room. "We are here today, not only to honor the memory of Sergeant John West, United States Army, but to recognize his legacy, his granddaughter, his pride, his equal in service and in spirit." He saluted me, and in that breathless moment I saw it. My parents frozen, Ashley blinking in disbelief, whispers silenced by the weight of truth. Then came the final blow. A second figure entered. Sabrina, my lawyer, in a black dress and heels that clicked like clockwork. She approached the pulpit and calmly opened a folder. "Before we proceed with the burial," she said, "the last will and testament of John West must be read, per his legal instruction." My mother turned pale. My father stood stiff, jaw clenched. But it was too late for lies. Sabrina began to read. "I, John West, being of sound mind, leave my entire estate, including properties, financial assets, and all personal effects, to my granddaughter Caitlin West, who, unlike the others, never asked me for anything and never pretended to love me when it was convenient." There was a long, painful pause. No one moved. You could hear the wooden pews creak as my mother shifted in her seat, trying to process what she couldn't stop. "To my son and his wife, I leave nothing. Your names are not forgotten, but your actions are remembered. To Ashley, I leave no inheritance, but a wish, that one day she might learn what real character looks like." A pin could have dropped. Maybe one did. I didn't hear it. My heartbeat was louder. But even then, even with the silence and the sting and the shame, they didn't apologize. Not a word. My father avoided my gaze. My mother looked at me like I had betrayed them. And Ashley? She stood in the same perfect stillness she'd mastered all her life. Expressionless, unreadable, untouchable. Only her eyes gave it away. The tremble in them. That was enough. I didn't speak at the burial. I didn't need to. The flag folded and placed in my hand said more than any eulogy ever could. I held it tight as the bugle played, as dirt hit the casket, as the man who saw me for who I truly was went into the ground. Afterward, I left without a word. No goodbyes, no forgiveness. Just wind on my back and truth in my hands. Weeks passed. The house was legally mine now, my grandfather's land, his records, his journals. But I didn't stay. Instead, I used the inheritance to build something else entirely. On the edge of town, where the old railway yard used to be, I opened a small building with wide windows and a hand-painted sign. The Quiet Table. No grand opening, no press. Inside, there were only simple things. warmth, meals, a place to sit without explanation. Veterans found their way there, some with medals, some with nothing, some silent, some broken, all of them seen. We never asked for names, we just served plates. The first man who came in said nothing, just nodded and sat down. I brought him stew and bread. He looked at the food like he hadn't been believed in for years. He said one word, thanks, and that was enough. I don't know what became of my parents. I never replied to the letter my father sent. Handwritten, shaky, 3 lines long. You were right. We were wrong. I hope someday you understand. I didn't hate him, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because healing isn't loud. It doesn't come with applause or forgiveness wrapped in ribbon. Sometimes healing is quiet, like a folded flag, like a warm meal, like a door that stays open without asking questions. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply refusing to become the thing that hurt you. I don't wait for their approval anymore. I know who I am, and that is enough.